I remember as a student at Xavier's College, I was very keen to learn and understand more about Indian art. I was keen to learn and understand more about world art. Neither was available to me in the 60s at the university. So 50 years later, the situation in India has not changed that much. Where do our young people today, where do they go if they want to understand India's place in the world, what India gave, what India received?
Museums are intercultural spaces. They promote intercultural dialogue between communities in multicultural societies and encourage increased knowledge, greater recognition, and appreciation of other cultures. This exhibition is an experiment, the first of its kind outside the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European borders, and attempts to provide a model for museums to share collections with people across the world.
The exhibition is built around a nucleus of works coming from Indian collections, public and private Indian collections, showcasing the cultural history going back not only thousands of years, but millions of years of South Asia. And putting this development into global perspective with the British Museum providing everything that pertains to the world beyond South Asia. So it's really joining forces, joining collections to come up with a new history and a new story.
The idea of this exhibition began in a conversation with Mr. Mukherjee. And we were talking about whether it would be possible to make some kind of exhibition in Mumbai that came out of the idea of a history of the world in 100 objects, to take things that would let us tell stories that would be of interest to a public in India. And we decided that the best way to do this was to choose objects from particular moments of Indian history. It would be absurd to try to tell the whole story of India. Impossible. So we thought we would choose 9 moments of history. 9 moments where most Indians know where India was at that point. Moments like the Indus Valley, like Ashoka, Akbar, independence. Those moments. And from those moments, we would look at what's happening in India and then what's happening in the world.
How do you showcase 1.5 million years history of India in 15,000 square feet space? We selected 104 objects from 28 museums in India and 3 private collectors. So our job was to convince them, telling them the importance of the project, that why this particular project is so important for India and Indian museums.
An exhibition needs 3 critical people. There is the curatorial vision that has to drive it. The exhibition designer has to understand the curatorial vision, and the lighting designer. It's the exhibition designer and the lighting designer that can make the objects speak.
I needed to understand who were the people who were going to visit this exhibition. It was our Indian public, which is very diverse. economically disparate, with many, many different languages, cultures, traditions, and everybody had to interact with this. And that is why we worked on a certain concept which took this into account, where there would be academic and intellectual contribution as well as an aesthetic role to play.
So my role as a graphic designer for this exhibition involved the overall visual identity for the whole project, which meant the signage, which meant the identity for the thing, the name, how it's rendered in 2 languages. We had a huge advantage of having superb typography now in India that harmonizes both Latin and Devanagari. So the signage as a result works really well.
For me, lighting is not just about making sure that the information is communicated. It is about ensuring that people who visit the exhibition are left with an experience which they remember. Because information in today's digital age is cheap. Anybody can collect the information sitting in their armchair in the comfort of their homes. And the relevance of exhibitions and museums today has become to bring together an impossible set of experiences which are spatial and also collective. And light, vision, and all the senses that come together in that are what we work with.
Somewhere around 2 million years ago, our ancestors in Africa began making tools like these. And this tool is where our shared history as human beings begins. Our ancestors needed something to let them scrape the meat off the bones of the animals they'd killed. They needed something to strip the skins so that they could wear the fur and the leather for protection. They needed something to strip the branches from the trees, to make shelters and to burn wood. And amazingly, they invented the hand axe.
The second section of this exhibition looks at the world's first cities. And as you walk into that section, the first things you see are 2 women. The little dancing girl from Maharaj, one of the most iconic objects from the Indus Valley civilizations, and she's standing next door to another lady, but someone who actually lived in an ancient Sumerian city in southern Iraq at roughly the same time. And these 2 citizens of the world's first cities introduce a section where we start to look at how life changed when these first cities emerged about 5,000 years ago.
How do you govern an empire where the people speak different languages, have different faiths, are different peoples? It's one of the great questions of the world. And from around 700 BCE, it began to be a real question as empires began to grow in the Middle East and the Far East. And in this room, there are 3 demonstrations of 3 different ways of how one ruler imposes his will on people of very different sorts. The oldest one, about 250 BCE, is the Indian one, of the Emperor Ashoka. And Ashoka decides that the way he will present his power is by writing in a public place, engraving on stone, the idea that should govern the empire. And he does it in an extraordinary way. He does it in different languages for the different peoples of the empire. It's one way of running a multiracial, multi-ethnic empire. About 40 years later, in China, the first emperor of China, Qingshi Huangdi, about 210 BC, has the same problem. How do you hold this enormous area together that you've conquered? They all speak different languages, they're all different kinds of people. And he writes only in one language, one script which will be the same right across his empire. And that script, which you can see behind me, is still the script of China today. For most of history, if you've been a ruler, you want to get two messages across to the people you rule. Firstly, that you're pretty good at ruling, and they're lucky to have you. But secondly, that you're their ruler because the gods want you to be their ruler. And that combination is a winner. But how do you communicate it? Before television, before newspapers, the internet, there's only one way that the ruler can regularly reach the subjects and tell them that the gods are on their side. And they do it through the coins.
We always wanted, as part of this exhibition, to bring together religious imagery from around the world at roughly the same time, to put them in conversations with each other. And at the heart of those conversations are the first two objects you see when you enter this part of the exhibition, which is an image of Christ on the cross and an image of the Hindu god Ganesh. Now, those two objects are very familiar to our audience, but what we wanted to do is surprise the visitor, because they aren't quite what they first seem. For an Indian visitor in Mumbai, seeing Ganesh, they're going to think this is an Indian object. Seeing Christ on the cross, they're going to think this is a European object. Actually, the Christ on the cross is the Indian object, and the image of the god Ganesh is actually from Indonesia. And then the other objects in this semicircular part of the exhibition are images of gods, goddesses, and divine figures, ancestral figures sometimes, from different parts of the world. And this, I think, is almost the first time I've ever seen an exhibition which has tried to bring together these different images from all over the world at the same time.
Most of the stories in this exhibition are stories where India is part of a movement, an idea that embraces the whole world. But there's one of the stories where India is right at the beginning, and that's the story of Buddhism. How do ideas travel? We know they travel by military conquest, we know they travel by trade, but they also travel, of course, by missionary activity. And the spread of Buddhism is one of the great triumphs of missionary activity, beginning from India, transforming the whole of East and Southeast Asia.
Section 6 of the exhibition is all about Indian Ocean trade and Indian Ocean traders. The objects in this section look at stories of how objects have been travelling around the Indian Ocean, creating connections between people, and with those objects, people have also been travelling as well. The two objects which start that section are 2,000 years old, showing how at the time of Ashoka, at the time of the Roman Empire, there was an awful lot of trade going on between India and the Roman Empire. So one of those objects is a Roman object which has travelled from the Roman world to India, an image of the god Poseidon. The other object is a pepper pot. It's in the shape of the hero Hercules, but it's a pepper pot containing Indian pepper for use at banquets in Roman Britain. So showing that actually 2,000 years ago, a lot of objects in Indian goods have been travelling long distances, even then.
One of the most significant moments in this exhibition was the opportunity to be able to present to the public two pictures. One is a picture of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. When you look at him closely, you'll see that he is holding up a European painting of the Virgin Mary. Mary has particular significance in the Islamic world because she is Maryam. Jahangir's own mother was Maryam. But
Jahangir took on the name for himself, Nuruddin, the light of the world. And in the darkness of the night that surrounds him on all sides, he himself is illuminating light that is coming out of him, Nuruddin, and he is holding up Mary. And around him are a series of calligraphies that give him hope for how to continue to rule through the troubled times of kingship. Right next to it is a sketch that is made by Rembrandt. And Rembrandt has copied a Mughal painting of Jahangir. Now, very few people know that late in his career, Rembrandt made 23 sketches based on Mughal paintings. These copies of Mughal paintings show that the Dutch East India Company was bringing important Mughal paintings for sale to Amsterdam, where an artist like Rembrandt would have had access to them. Rembrandt is looking at Jahangir, and Jahangir is looking at a European painting. So at one level, it's a great opportunity to be able to present to the world that it's not just Mughals who are learning from European art, but also European artists are enamored with Indian art.
The rest of the section looks at the opulence and the luxury of courts from other parts of the world. At the same time as we tend to think about the courts in Ming China, Mughal India, Spanish Europe, there are equally powerful, equally opulent, equally luxurious courts happening in West Africa and many other parts of the world.
The great age of the Enlightenment allowed artists to travel to many other parts of the world to start documenting the flora and fauna, the landscape of those countries. Johann Zoffany is one of the most important European artists who played a significant role in this endeavor. In the middle of the painting, he makes his self-portrait as if he is distracted from what he is painting himself to turn around and look at us. It's a view of his studio in Lucknow in the 1780s, probably somewhere between 1786 to 1788 when he makes this canvas. And all around him in his studio are paintings that he has created that are up for sale, or maybe that he has made for the gentlemen that share the canvas with him, who are his friends. On the one side, we see Antoine Paulier, who had become a bit of a Nawab living in India. And Antoine Paulier had become a big collector of Persian and Sanskrit manuscripts. So he is knowledge gathering on one side, because you see his elbow resting on a table where there are these Persian manuscripts that he has gathered. On the other side of the painting is Claude Martin, famous in India because he created La Martiniere schools, and so there is Claude Martin, and he is pointing towards his house that he has just constructed. And then on the extremities of the picture, these Indians on each side who are servile, who dare not wear shoes in front of the Europeans, who are supplicants, who fold their hands in front of their masters, offering up their produce, offering up the knowledge of their landscapes, and Zoffany's own expression. He's the only person who makes eye contact with us. He's reporting back to us and telling us what's happening in the late 18th century. Zoffany's picture is poignant. It's got a lot of depth in what it is trying to communicate. It's telling us not just about the propaganda of getting to know each other, of what globalization brings, but there's a certain insight about the terms at which that exchange is going to take place between Europe and India. And I think, therefore, this painting speaks to us today at many more levels than just the simple narrative of Europe meets India in the late 18th century. This exhibition is celebrating globalization but not in a propagandist way. We've suffered because of the conflicts that have come when different civilizations come in close contact with each other. It isn't always harmony. Communication with each other and exchanges also come with warfare, what we call today the othering, with strife. It would have been disingenuous of us if we were just going to be laudatory all through this exhibition, celebrating globalization without talking about the enormous sacrifices, the conflicts, the terror that has come along with globalization. Our message is of peace, because only with knowledge of each other can there be peace. But we also have to learn that those exchanges were not always very peaceful. So the quest for freedom presumes that there was a time when there was a lack of freedom. And so that's what the rest of the artworks in this gallery bring us to see the concerns of the world today.
How do you end an exhibition like India in the world? You know that those objects have got to be from our time, but they've got to also provide a full stop or a way of reflecting on the whole of the exhibition which the visitor has just seen. So what we did was to take objects which asked the visitor to think again about how they might conceive of history and their relationship to the past. The piece Unicode is by a contemporary Indian artist, and it's a modern take on that crucial Indian notion of the cyclical nature of time, the way in which the universe has to be constantly remade, which of course is very, very different from a Western linear notion of time, which you've actually seen through the rest of this exhibition. Juxtaposed to that is an Australian work of art, Bush Potato Dreaming, which is a picture from Dreamtime. And Dreamtime isn't just about ancestral time, very, very long time ago. Dreamtime always is happening at the same time as the here and now, and always is happening at the same time as the distant future. So again, a very different way of thinking about the relationship between the past and the present, which are always actually happening at the same time.
So what is the legacy of India in the world? We hope that it will provide a model for building partnerships between institutions. So where they can share ideas, people, skills, expertise, and it's also about sharing collections, especially for encyclopedic museums where they can make objects accessible to people across the world who would otherwise have never had a chance to see it.
I think the entire climate of the exhibition was one of mutual trust and faith between the CSMVS Museum and all the other museums that have been involved, including the British Museum and the 20 to 30 Indian museums that were there. After all, these are institutions which lent their objects in absolute surety that the objects will be looked after here. The conservation responsibilities did not stop at just the treatment of the objects so that they could be fit for display. But even during the exhibition, every day, the climate was monitored, the dust levels were monitored, the health of the showcases was being monitored to ensure that by the end of the exhibitions, the objects show no change, so to speak, in the condition reports.
Because one of our major challenges in India is to work our way through a transition in what the museum means to us. As we all know, for many, many people, the museum is still very much the 19th century ajaib ghar that you encounter in the opening pages of Kipling's Kim. Our understanding of the museum in contemporary times is radically different. We tend to see the museum now not as a container of objects, but as a platform for experiences. How do we work our way through this transition? How do we bring audiences into an understanding that they are not merely recipients of cultural experience, but that they're also participants in it? And I tend to think that India and the world was an important step in that direction. It was also a way of empowering viewers, of not only introducing them to new worlds of cultural experience, but to offer them conceptual tools by various means, whether it was through the work of the docents or the education department or the academic outreach program, or indeed many of the other conversations, formal and informal, that surrounded the exhibition.
We mainly divided the education program into 3 strands. One was the schools program, and we had something called a gateway pack, which came from the gateway objects. The second strand of the education program was the family activities, and this we would do normally on weekends. The third strand of the program was the special needs activities. CSMVS has a particularly strong commitment to providing universal access, be it physical or intellectual, to people from all kinds of circumstances. Another element of the education program was the outreach, and this was made possible by the museum's pioneering initiative, the City CSMVS Museum on Wheels, which is a bus with traveling exhibitions that go out into the city and into other parts of Maharashtra, and carry the museum to places where people would otherwise not have any access to museums. This time, the exhibition within the Museum on Wheels was a smaller representation of India and the world.
What was interesting, we noted, was that the exhibition was most popular with children, school and college students, and young adults, and almost half of the total visitor count was for people from Mumbai and surrounding areas. In the 13 weeks that the exhibition was on display at the museum, more than 200 schools and colleges sent their students to visit it. The exhibition exceeded all expectations when the total visitor count touched almost 200,000.
I think the most rewarding moment for me came when I was with the British Museum curator on the grounds of CSMVS. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we saw these, it must have been 100 of them, school children, sitting on the edge of the lawns, all of them looking kind of exhausted, just sitting. They must have been 10, 11 years old, all the girls in one row, all the boys in another row. So we were standing there, and I spoke to one of the boys, and I said something like, "Thak gaya, you know, kaisa tu itna jwan hai, kaisa itna thak gaya?" They sort of looked at me, not expecting me to talk to them, and then one little fellow bounced up, came up to me, came up to us, put his hands out like, "Humne to sari dunya dekha."
ரொம்ப அற்புதமாக இருக்கு. ஹரப்பா civilization is very extraordinary. நாங்கள் நேரில் பார்க்கும்போது அது வந்து எங்களுக்கு வர ஜென்ரேஷனுக்கு அது வந்து ரொம்ப ரொம்ப யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருக்கும்னு நாங்கள் நினைக்கிறோம். எல்லாம் ஃபுல்லாகவே நாங்கள் வந்து விசிட் பண்ணோம். தட் இஸ் வெரி, அதாவது நாகரிகம் வந்து ரொம்ப வளர்ச்சி அடைஞ்சது எந்த விதத்தில் வளர்ச்சி அடைஞ்சிருக்கு அப்படிங்கிறத நாங்கள் ரொம்பவே ரசித்து இன்ச் பை இன்ச்சாக நாங்கள் வந்து ரசித்து பார்த்தோம்.
The timeline of history that we are used to learning, the reflections of those names that come up. And second is we don't really know the linear timeline. This actually puts that timeline into perspective. We look at ancient times as really old, the ones that we see on television and whatever we read on Wikipedia. But this actually gives a very real perception to the whole. At a point I was imagining myself being Flash and actually passing my hand through the exhibition to just hold the history. Just to be able to hold a part of their history. It's just so brilliant.
This was a beautiful exhibition, and on behalf of my grandson Kabir, he says he loved the different varieties.
So this is a good opportunity for children to come here and understand how museum works and what can museum can be that tool where we can teach our young students about history in much more interesting and interactive way.
Normally, people living in city or people who don't go out very often rarely get to see these kind of exhibits anywhere, and also the information that goes along with it is really good. So gives a perspective on what happened here as well as abroad in last almost 2,000-3,000 years. Definitely very insightful.
It's important because we should know about our history and the history of the world, and if we know the history, we do know why we exist, and then we appreciate our existence. So
I think from studying from the book is not really enough, and there we can get only pictures, and we always do Google it and that's it, and we don't search more. So this is really important to visit somewhere and where we can look those things from closely, the intricacy of the works.
ये हम लोग विजुअली देखते हैं. जब विजुअली सब कुछ आता है तो समझने में बेहतर होता है सब चीज़ें. जब हम लोग किताब में पढ़ते हैं तो वो हम लोग मतलब इतना याद नहीं होता जितना विजुअली जब चीज़ें आती है तब उतना याद होता है. तो ये एजुकेशन का पार्ट हो सकता है.
भारताचा इतिहास खूप जुना आहे. हे बघून मला बरं वाटतं आपल्याला, म्हणजे फार जुना आहे.
I have had the opportunity, the privilege to go abroad and see museums abroad and have this sort of an experience abroad, and always think, why can't I have it at home? Because look at the kind of people who are in this room right now. I mean, in these rooms right now. They come from all walks of life. There are children. There are people who probably have never been to a museum before, but have had the opportunity to see objects and history, presented them to in a way that is not didactic, that's not preachy, that's not pedantic. So that really will perhaps set off, a light bulb somewhere and say, hey, I want to know more about this.
मुझे डिफरेंट लगा, मतलब जिस फेस से दिखाया, मतलब हर एक चीज़ है BC से लेके AD तक, तो वो समझने में पूरा एक विजुअल पिक्चर आ गया सब चीज़ों का. तो ये बहुत बढ़िया लगा.
Something that I've never even read about, forget seeing ever. So it's like a new perception being shown to the world. It's like a window to the world, like missing world.
मेरा नाम मरियम है. मेरा बात देखी, मैंने स्पून देखी, अच्छा लगा.